testimony of a former assassin.
Have you ever reflected deeply on the eternal destiny of your soul? Imagine yourself in a moment of complete darkness, where screams of agony echo and the suffocating heat of unquenchable flames consumes everything around you. Could hell, so often described as a distant concept, be more real and closer than you imagine? God's Word constantly warns us about the consequences of unforgiven sin, but how many of us actually take it seriously? Maybe you are living your life believing that there is plenty of time to redeem yourself, to seek forgiveness, and to change. However, what I am going to share here may turn your perception upside down. Today, you will hear the testimony of someone who lived in darkness, surrounded by choices that opened the door to unspeakable torments. A former assassin, a lost man, who not only faced the depths of hell, but was also given a second chance by divine grace to warn you. But before we dive into this transformative story, think, how many times have you ignored Jesus' call? How many opportunities for reconciliation with God have been passed over due to pride, doubt, or distraction? Every word of this testimony carries eternal weight, as it is not just a story. This is an alert, a chance for you to reconsider your choices and seek the salvation that only Jesus can offer. This is the time to open your eyes and prepare your heart for a truth that can change your life and your eternal destiny. If these words have already touched your heart, I invite you to do something powerful right now. Write your prayer request in the comments. It doesn't matter what your struggle is, what weight you carry, or the fear that paralyzes you. Jesus is here, ready to act in your life. Prayer is the bridge that connects us to the Father, a direct channel of mercy, grace, and transformation. The Bible teaches us, "Call to me and I will answer and tell you great and unfathomable things that you do not know." Jeremiah 33:3. Prayer is not just words thrown to the wind. It is an act of faith, a cry of the soul that reaches the heart of God. When we pray, we move heaven, break chains, and make room for the light of Christ to shine in our lives. So right now, what is in your heart? It could be for you, for a loved one, or even for something that bothers you, and you don't even know how to resolve it. Together, we will create a chain of faith and intercession. And I promise you, I will pray for every comment left here, because I believe that where there are 2 or 3 gathered in the name of Jesus, He is present. Matthew 18:20. Take this moment to support this content with a like and subscribe to the channel. Your participation is essential for this message, to reach even more people who need to hear about the love and salvation of Jesus Christ. Activate the bell so you don't miss the next powerful revelations and teachings we have prepared for you. We are on this spiritual journey together, and your prayer can be the beginning of a great miracle. Let's pray together and see how God can transform our lives. He wasn't just another person lost in the world. He was the very reflection of what it means to live in darkness. Before experiencing divine transformation, his life seemed like an endless cycle of violence and darkness. He carried with him the coldness of someone who had already lost any connection to compassion or love. Behind every crime committed, there was a soul that, in fact, silently cried out for a purpose, for a reason to exist. With each decision, with each trigger pulled, a small part of his humanity seemed to shatter, as if, little by little, he was approaching an invisible, deep, and eternal abyss. He grew up in an environment where chaos was the only standard. The streets were his school, and the criminals around him were his teachers. From an early age, he was taught to never trust anyone, to survive through fear and strength, and to resolve everything with violence. It was a life without love, without direction, where every choice seemed to lead to an inevitable destiny. To him, God was just a distant idea, a weakness that the strong could not afford. Religion was something he saw as a waste of time, something for those who had to cling to an illusion because they couldn't deal with the brutal reality of life. Over time, he began to accumulate a list of sins so long that he himself could not remember them all. There were times when even he wondered if there was something beyond the life he led. But these questions were soon drowned out by the need to survive. There was no time for regrets or reflections, as the world around him offered no space for that. He became an expert at avoiding any kind of emotional connection, even with people who trusted him. There was a hole deep in his soul that nothing seemed to fill. The feeling of emptiness was constant, but he hid it well. To others, he was cold, calculating, ruthless. But inside, he knew something was wrong, that something was missing. The lack of purpose consumed him, but he didn't know what to do with it. And it was this absence that led him to sink even deeper into the path of destruction, searching, without realizing it, for something that could fill that void. There were times when he wondered if there was a way out of the life he led. But these questions were never asked out loud. It was as if he was afraid to admit that he needed something other than himself. After all, for him, dependence was synonymous with weakness. However, in the quietest moments, when he was alone with his thoughts, a question haunted him. What if there is something more? What if I'm wrong? Each day, he fell deeper into darkness. The nights were full of nightmares, but he never shared them. The blood on his hands never seemed to leave, even when he tried to ignore it. He knew he was heading towards a tragic end, but he didn't know how to change course. The truth is, he didn't even believe he deserved another chance. Life was a cycle of chaos that seemed to have no end until something happened. Something he couldn't explain. Something that would begin to transform his view of everything he thought he knew about the world, about good and evil, about eternity. This event forced him to face the consequences of his choices in a way he had never imagined. It was the beginning of something that would change not just his life, but his soul forever. And now, he knows that none of this happened by chance. Even at the height of his darkness, there was something or someone watching him, waiting for the right moment to intervene. It is as if every mistake, every sin, every wrong choice is leading you to an inevitable encounter with the truth. And that truth was scarier than anything he had ever faced. This is the story of how someone can be so lost, so deep in sin, that there seems to be no hope left. But there is. It is the story of how divine grace can reach even the most hardened of hearts. Because, deep down, this is the story of all of us. In one way or another, we have all felt disconnected, without purpose, adrift. We've all wondered if there is something more, if there is a second chance, if there is a God who really cares. Have you ever felt this way? This is the question that echoes. You don't need to answer now, but remember her, because she will be waiting for you at the end of this story. He didn't know that day would be different. It all seemed part of the routine of chaos and darkness that consumed his life. The same emptiness, the same feeling that something was always missing. But now the weight seemed greater. It was as if the world around him was beginning to crumble, as if every wrong choice, every step taken in the opposite direction of what was right, was finally taking a heavy toll. What he didn't know was that he was about to have an experience that would change everything. That feeling of something wrong that had accompanied him for so long finally found a breaking point. He remembers how he started. An intense pain in the chest, a heat that rose as if something was burning from the inside out. He thought it was just another consequence of a life without limits, without care, without purpose. But he soon realized that this was not something that could be explained naturally. It was something beyond what he could comprehend, something that defied all his logic and understanding. The ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet. He felt like he was falling, but it was no ordinary fall. It was a fall towards something deep, dark, and eternal. Suddenly, he found himself in a place he could never have imagined. It was a dark void, but at the same time full of sounds. Screams, moans, voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The smell of sulfur was suffocating, penetrating, as if it permeated his skin and his soul. He tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come out. It was as if the very air had been knocked out of him. He looked around and saw shapes, shadows that moved, some looking human, others completely unrecognizable. He knew he was in a place unlike anything he had ever experienced. The environment was oppressive. There was fire, but not an ordinary fire. It was a fire that seemed to consume without destroying, that burned but never gave relief. He realized that those flames were not there to purify or transform. They were there to torture, to punish, to remind everyone there of the weight of their choices. He saw faces. Some were known, others were not. They were the faces of people who seemed to be trapped in an eternal cycle of pain and regret. And worst of all, he knew there was no way out for them. The condemnation was final, irreversible, absolute. As he watched, something caught his attention. It was as if a force was pulling him to a specific place. He saw a figure that looked different from the others. He was a man, or at least he seemed to be. But something in his eyes showed that he wasn't just a lost soul. He radiated a deep evil, a presence that made the air around him feel even heavier. When he looked at it, he felt as if his entire past was exposed. Every sin, every mistake, every choice that had led him to this moment. It was as if that figure could see directly into his soul, see all his darkest secrets. Then he heard the voice. It was no ordinary voice. It was deep, cutting, filled with a contempt that seemed to pierce his mind. "You belong to us," the voice said. "Every choice you made, every moment of hate, of violence, of selfishness, it all led you here. You knew what you were doing. You chose this." He tried to argue, tried to find words to defend himself, but all he could feel was a crushing weight of guilt. He knew those words were true. He knew that somehow he had chosen that path, without even realizing it. As the figure approached, he felt something shift. In the midst of all that darkness, in the midst of all that torment, he felt a different presence. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was like a small ray of light that penetrated the darkness, like a light breeze that brought with it a hope he had forgotten existed. He didn't know where it came from, but he knew it was his only chance. He tried to hold on to that, tried to focus all his attention on that little ray of hope. And it was at that moment that he realized something that would change his life forever. Hell was not just a physical place. He was a state of being, a total and absolute separation from God. It was more than flames and darkness. It was the complete absence of love, of kindness, of light. He understood that everything he had done, all his choices, had taken him further and further away from God, until he was completely disconnected. And in that disconnection, he realized there was nothing he could do for himself. He couldn't escape. He couldn't save himself. He couldn't change his destiny. As he processed all of this, the shadowy figure began to laugh. It was a laughter that reverberated throughout the place, a sound that seemed to carry with it all the evil in the world. "Do you think there is hope for you?" the voice asked. "Do you think you can escape? There is no escape. You are ours." He felt despair begin to set in, but then, suddenly, the small presence of light began to grow. I want you to comment below. There is hope. Write these words in the comments now. I want to see you declare that you believe, that there is a purpose, that no matter how deep you are, there is still hope. If this touched your heart, stay with me, because there is still so much to share about what he saw and how he found a way out. Let's go together. The light began as a spark, almost insignificant amidst the dark and oppressive vastness of hell. He didn't know where it came from or why it was there, but something inside him changed the instant he felt its presence. It wasn't just a physical light. It was as if that presence carried with it a force that went straight to the depths of his soul, breaking the invisible chains that imprisoned him. He began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was as if, for the first time, he was being seen, not for his sins, but for something beyond them. As the light grew, the shadowy figure that had previously stared at him began to retreat. It was almost as if that glow was unbearable to her, as if the very concept of purity repelled her. This only confirmed something that he was already beginning to suspect. That light did not come from inside hell. She was completely foreign to that place, something that didn't belong there but was there for a reason. He didn't know what it was, but every part of his soul cried out to get closer to it. It was the first time since he arrived that he felt something other than fear and guilt. He tried to walk towards the light, but he felt like something was holding him back. It was as if the shadows around him had a life of their own, as if the sins of his past had turned into chains that pulled him back, trying to prevent him from taking even one step. He began to struggle, but it seemed that the more he tried, the stronger the resistance. He heard voices, mocking, laughing, saying it was useless. "Do you think you can escape? Do you think you deserve this light?" These words echoed in his mind, bringing to light all his flaws, all his mistakes. It was then that he heard another voice. It was different from all the others. She was not mocking or full of hatred, but calm, firm, full of authority. "Cry out to me," the voice said. He didn't know where it came from, but he knew it was the source of that light. He felt a battle within himself. Part of him wanted to surrender to that voice, while another part was paralyzed by fear and shame. How could he cry out for help? How could he ask for forgiveness after everything he had done? But the voice continued, soft but irresistible. "I am here. I always have been." Those words broke something inside him. For the first time, he let go of the pride, doubt, and guilt that had kept him trapped for so long. He began to whisper, almost helplessly, "Help me, please, help me." The instant he said this, something extraordinary happened. The light intensified, and he felt the chains that bound him begin to break. It wasn't something he could do for himself. It was something that was being done for him. As the light enveloped him, he began to see things he had never noticed before. He saw flashes of his life, moments when God had tried to reach him, but that he had ignored. He saw the faces of the people he had hurt, not with hatred, but with a deep sense of sadness and regret. He realized that, even in his worst moments, there was a presence that never left him, that was always there, patiently waiting for him. Then he heard the voice again, but this time it was clearer, closer. "You don't belong here. I paid the price so you could be free." These words brought a wave of emotion so intense that he fell to his knees. He realized that the light was not just a distant presence. It was the manifestation of God's love, something so pure and so powerful that not even hell could contain it. He felt something break inside him, as if an immense weight was being lifted from his soul. The light continued to grow, and he began to hear other voices. But now they were different. They were not mockery or accusations, but songs, words of encouragement and love. He realized he was not alone, that there were others praying for him, interceding for his soul. It made him cry. He had never imagined that anyone, anywhere, would care enough to pray for him. And then, for the first time, he saw a way. It wasn't clear or easy, but it was there, illuminated by the light that now surrounded him. He knew that following that path meant abandoning everything he knew, all the choices that had led him there. But he also knew it was his only chance. He began walking, one step at a time, feeling the shadows trying to pull him back, but determined to keep going. If you are here with me so far, I want you to comment, "I choose the light." These words are not just a statement, they are a commitment, an act of faith. Write this in the comments and share with me what you are feeling, because there's still more to be revealed, and I promise you don't want to miss what's coming. Let's go on this journey together, step by step, towards the light. As he walked along the light-lit path, each step seemed more challenging than the last. The weight of the shadows was still there, trying to pull him back, as if the sins of his past didn't want to let go of his soul so easily. It was as if every memory of his mistakes were thrown at him, like sharp arrows that sought to hurt him and divert him from that path. He could hear voices mocking in the distance, shouting that he was not worthy, that this was an illusion, that he could never escape the fate he had chosen for himself. But there was something different now. The light that enveloped him not only illuminated the path before him, but also warmed his soul, filling every empty space with something he had never felt before. It was peace, a peace that surpassed all understanding. His heart racing, he realized he wasn't just walking toward the light. The light was also coming to him. It was as if with every step he took, God was moving closer, reaching out to pull him from the abyss. However, the path was full of obstacles. He stumbled upon patches of darkness, symbols of his past that seemed to materialize before him. One of those moments was particularly painful. He saw a victim's face. It wasn't a clear vision, but enough to bring him back to that moment, to make him relive the horror of his own choices. The weight of guilt seemed unbearable. He stopped halfway, with tears streaming down his face, feeling like he didn't have the strength to continue. "I can't," he whispered, his voice thick with pain. It was then that the light around him began to intensify, as if responding to his weakness. He heard that voice again, calm and authoritative. "My strength is made perfect in your weakness." It was as if God was telling him that he didn't need to carry this weight alone, that the journey wasn't about what he could do, but about what God was doing in him. He began to realize that every obstacle in his path was not just a reminder of his past, but also an opportunity to choose differently, to leave it behind. Each shadow that appeared was a decision he needed to make: continue carrying the weight or hand it over to God. One of those decisions came when he saw a figure he recognized immediately. It was someone he had betrayed, someone he knew could never forgive him. He felt his heart sink, as he knew that figure was a reflection of his own lack of forgiveness. He had never apologized, never sought reconciliation. The light around him seemed to pulse, as if waiting for his reaction. He fell to his knees and, for the first time, prayed sincerely. "Lord, I am not worthy. I never was. But if there is anything I can do to change this, show me. Help me to forgive, just as I hope be forgiven." He didn't know what to expect after that prayer, but something inside him changed. He felt as if a layer of the weight he had been carrying had been lifted away. The journey continued, but he began to notice something different. The light that surrounded him not only illuminated the path ahead, it also revealed things about himself. He began to realize that all his life he had been looking for redemption in all the wrong places. He had tried to fill the void with power, violence, pleasure, but none of it had worked. It was like trying to quench his thirst with salt water. The more he drank, the thirstier he became. He realized that the only thing that could fill that void was God, the same God he had ignored his entire life. As he walked, he began to speak in a loud voice, as if he were having a conversation with God. He didn't know how to pray the right way, but it didn't matter. He just talked, pouring out everything that was in his heart. He confessed his mistakes, his fears, his doubts, and with each word, he felt the light growing brighter, as if God was saying, "I already knew, but I needed to hear it from you." In the middle of this conversation, something extraordinary happened. He felt a peace so intense, it seemed almost physical. He stopped on the way, closed his eyes and let that sensation completely envelop him. For the first time in his life, he was not afraid. He felt no guilt. He just felt the presence of God, a presence that said, without words, that he was loved, that he was forgiven, that he had a purpose. I want you to comment below. I lay down my burdens. Write these words in the comments now, as an act of faith, as a sign that you too are ready to leave the past behind and follow the light. I want you to feel part of this journey, because it's not just about him, it's about all of us. Share in the comments if this message is touching your heart, and stay with me, because there is still more to be revealed. The transformation is just beginning. He continued to walk, each step feeling lighter than the last. Not that the path had become any easier. The shadows were still there, trying to find him at the edges of his vision, whispering lies and memories of a past that seemed determined to keep him trapped. But something had changed deep within him. He was no longer alone. The light that enveloped him was not just an external force. She now seemed to burn within him, like a flame that could not be put out. As he continued, he began to notice something strange about that path. It was not a straight road. It was a labyrinth, full of detours and choices. At some forks, the darkness seemed almost impenetrable, as if simply looking in that direction could suck you back into the abyss. In others, the light seemed to shine more brightly, inviting him to continue. He began to understand that the path he was taking was not only physical, but also spiritual. Each step was a decision, an act of faith, a conscious choice to leave the past behind and hold on to the promise of something greater. It was then that he saw something that made him stop. Halfway there was an object that he recognized immediately. It was something he had carried with him for much of his life, a symbol of who he was before all this began. It was a weapon, the same one he had used in his darkest moments, an instrument of pain and destruction. He approached her cautiously, as if the simple act of touching her could bring him back to the man he used to be. He wondered why it was there, why it had been placed in his path. For a moment, he stood frozen, staring at the object. The memory of what he had done with that weapon came back like a blow, clear and painful. He saw the faces, heard the screams, felt the weight of what he had done. He thought about how, for so long, he had justified his actions, telling himself that it was necessary, that there was no other choice. But now, faced with that memory, he knew there was no justification. He knew it had been wrong. He knew he needed to leave it behind. The light around him seemed to pulse, as if it was waiting for him to do something. He knelt before the gun and began to pray. Lord, I'm not worthy of being here. I'm not worthy of your light, of your presence. But if you brought me here, there must be a reason. I give it to you. All the hate, all the pain, all the blame. I don't want to carry this anymore. As he spoke, he felt as if something inside him was being ripped away. It was painful, but also freeing, as if he was finally letting go of the chains that had held him back for so long. After a few moments, he stood up. The gun was still there, but it no longer had power over him. He looked at her one last time and continued walking. Each step felt safer, more determined. He knew there was still a lot to face, but now he had something he didn't have before: hope. He knew that the light that guided him would not abandon him, no matter what lay ahead. As he continued, he began to hear something different. There were no longer the mocking voices or the whispers of the shadows. It was music, soft and full of peace. He couldn't identify where it came from, but it seemed to fill the air, bringing with it a feeling of comfort and security. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him. It was as if each note was speaking directly to his soul, reminding him that he wasn't alone, that there was someone walking with him, even if he couldn't see it. He began to sing along, almost without realizing it. The words fell from his lips, as if they had been engraved in his heart since the beginning of time. He realized that this song wasn't just for him. It was for all those who were lost, trapped in darkness, looking for a way out. He started thinking about all the people he had hurt, all the lives he had negatively impacted. He knew he couldn't go back and fix everything, but he also knew he could do something different going forward. And so he made a promise, not just to himself, but to God. He promised that if he left that place, he would dedicate his life to helping other people find the light. He promised that he would use his story, his mistakes, his failures, as a testimony to the transforming power of God. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it would be worth it, because for the first time in his life, he felt like he had a purpose, that his life had a greater meaning. I want you to comment below, "I choose purpose." Write these words in the comments now, as a commitment to follow the light, to leave the past behind and embrace the future God has for you. Share with me what this message means to you, because your story is important too. We are on this journey together, and there is so much more to discover. Stay with me, because it's not over yet. He continued to walk, and each step seemed to guide him closer to something he couldn't yet define, but knew was greater than anything he had ever experienced. The path was clearer now, but that didn't mean the challenges were gone. On the contrary, he felt as if the light around him was preparing him for something even deeper, something that would test not only his faith, but also his resolve to leave the past behind. At one point, he began to notice a change in the atmosphere around him. The darkness that had previously seemed constant now seemed to condense into more defined, almost human shapes, as if the shadow itself was trying to materialize. He felt a shiver run down his spine, but he didn't stop. The song he had heard before was still in his mind, like a constant reminder that he wasn't alone. He murmured a simple prayer, almost a whisper, "God, be with me." Suddenly, one of those shadows completely took shape, blocking his path. He stopped, staring at what seemed to be a tall, imposing figure, but with no face, just a dark void where the eyes should have been. The presence was overwhelming, charged with something he could only describe as pure hatred. It was as if that figure was the personification of all the forces that had tried to destroy him throughout his life. He felt the pressure of guilt and fear begin to build up again, but then he remembered the light. He looked up, closed his eyes, and in a trembling voice said, "I don't belong to you anymore." The words came out like a scream from his soul. He didn't know where the courage came from, but something inside him was stronger than fear, stronger than guilt. The figure before him hesitated, as if struck by something invisible. It was at that moment that he realized that the light around him was not just there to guide him, she was also his protection, his weapon against the darkness. He took a step forward, and the figure began to dissolve, as if the light itself was consuming it. As he continued, he began to reflect on what that figure represented. It wasn't just a shadow on the path, it was a reflection of his own fears, his own insecurities. He began to understand that in order to move forward, he needed to face not only the external forces, but also the inner demons that had held him captive for so long. He realized that the journey he was taking was not just an escape from hell, it was a direct confrontation with everything he was, everything he had become, and everything he hoped to be. The light around him seemed to respond to his thoughts, pulsing gently, almost like encouragement. He began to feel a strength that wasn't his, something that pushed him to continue, even when he thought he couldn't take another step. He began to realize that, although he was physically walking alone, spiritually, he was surrounded. He didn't know who or what was praying for him, but he felt the prayers like an invisible wind that drove him forward. It was then that he saw something that made him stop again. In front of him, there was a portal, but it wasn't what he imagined a portal should be like. It wasn't grand or shiny. It was simple. almost understated, but there was something about it that conveyed a sense of gravity and purpose. He knew instantly that this portal was a decision point. He could feel the weight of the choice he was about to make. He knew that walking through that portal meant leaving everything behind: the hate, the guilt, the fear, and fully embracing the light. But then, as if from the depths of hell, he heard again the voices trying to hold him back. They whispered lies, trying to convince him that he wasn't worthy, that it was all an illusion, that he could never change. He felt the doubt beginning to creep in again, but then he remembered the words he had heard earlier: "I paid the price, so you could be free." He closed his eyes and took a step towards the portal. The instant he did so, the light around him exploded in intensity, as if celebrating his decision. He felt something break inside him, as if the last chains that tied him to his past had been destroyed. He walked through the portal, and the moment he did, everything changed. The path ahead of him seemed clearer than ever, and he knew that although there were still challenges ahead, he was no longer alone. He felt God's presence stronger than ever, as if he were being carried by something greater than himself. He knew this journey wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who needed hope, everyone who needed to know that no matter how deep you've fallen, there's always a chance to get back up. I want you to comment here: "I go through the portal." Write these words as an act of faith, as a commitment to leave the past behind and embrace the future that God has prepared for you. Your journey is important, and your words can inspire others to do the same. Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with me, because there is still so much more to be revealed. We're just getting started. When passing through the portal, everything seemed to transform. He couldn't explain exactly what had changed, but he felt that something profound and irrevocable had happened. The darkness that was once almost palpable now seemed distant, like a faint shadow that could barely reach him. The light surrounding him was different, stronger, warmer, as if it had penetrated to the very depths of his soul. It was as if he was experiencing for the first time what it meant to be truly free. But with that freedom also came a new clarity, a vision he'd never had before about himself, about life, and about what really mattered. He looked around and noticed that the path had changed again. Now, it was no longer a place of torment and doubt. There was a sense of calm, but also of purpose. He could see, in the distance, a horizon that seemed to shine with an intensity that was almost difficult to face. It was as if that place represented something he had always searched for, but had never known how to name. He felt a mix of emotions: gratitude for having come this far, but also a weight of responsibility. He knew he wasn't just there for him. He knew he had been saved for something greater. As he walked, he began to hear again the voice that had guided him. This time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was clear, strong, as if it were speaking directly to his heart. You were called for a purpose. You saw what many did not. Now, what will you do with it? Those words echoed inside him, bringing up questions he had tried to avoid. He knew that, if he had come this far, it was not to return to the life he led before. He knew he had a choice to make, but that choice was no longer about saving his soul. It was about how he would use his life to save others. As he reflected, he began to remember the people he had left behind. Faces began to appear in his mind: friends, family, even strangers he had encountered throughout his life. He thought about how many of these people were trapped in the same darkness he had experienced, walking in circles, not realizing they were moving towards the abyss. He felt a deep pain for these souls, a pain he had never felt before. It was as if, for the first time, he could see the world through God's eyes, not with judgment, but with compassion. He knew he couldn't ignore it. He knew that if God had allowed him to experience all that he had experienced, it was so that he would become a beacon for those who were still lost. But he also knew this wouldn't be easy. He knew the world would not easily accept what he had to share. He knew there would be doubts, rejection, perhaps even persecution. But he also knew he could no longer go back. He could no longer pretend that he hadn't seen what he saw, that he hadn't felt what he felt. As he continued, he began talking to God again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a conversation, a complete surrender. Lord, I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm not the most qualified for this, but if you've gotten me this far, then I trust you. I don't know how, but I'll do whatever it takes to accomplish the purpose the Lord has for me. He felt the light around him pulse again, almost as confirmation that his words had been heard. Suddenly he stopped. In front of him, there was something that looked like a book, floating in the air. He approached it slowly, almost reverently, and noticed that the pages were blank, but he knew somehow that this book was his life. He understood that from that moment on, every choice he made, every word he spoke, would be written in that book. He felt a weight, but also a hope. He knew that this book didn't need to be a continuation of the chapters he had already written. He knew he had a chance to start something new. He placed his hand on the book and felt a wave of heat pass through his body. He knew that from now on, his life would be different. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could decide what he would do with the future. He looked up at the bright horizon and took a step forward, feeling as if he were entering a new chapter, not just of his life, but of something much larger. I want you to comment here. I write a new chapter. Write these words in the comments as a symbol that you too are ready to start again, to leave the past behind and live the purpose God has for you. I want to know what this message means to you. Let's write a new story together, because there is still more to discover, more to share, and I promise we are just getting started. Stay with me, because the next step will be even deeper. He felt the first step in this new chapter was almost symbolic, loaded with meaning. The weight he had been carrying for so long seemed finally to be behind him, dissolved in the light that now illuminated his path. But with this new journey also came the knowledge that he couldn't stop. There was something greater waiting for him, a purpose that he still didn't fully understand, but that was beginning to pulse in his heart like a flame that couldn't be put out. He knew he needed to move forward, not just for himself, but for all those still trapped in the darkness he had left behind. As he walked, he began to feel a different connection to everything around him. It was as if the world had changed, but at the same time, he knew that the transformation was within him. The air felt lighter, each breath filled with a peace he had never experienced. He began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed, the gentle sound of a wind that seemed to whisper words of comfort, the light that danced around him like a constant reminder that he was not alone. But at the same time, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He began to reflect on what it meant to have a second chance. The weight of it was both liberating and frightening. He thought about the lives he had negatively impacted, the bad decisions he had made, and how it had shaped the person he was before all of this. But at the same time, he knew that these same failures were now part of his testimony, his mission. He understood that while he could never erase the past, he could use it as an example, living proof that no one is beyond redemption, that no one is so lost that God cannot reach them. With each step, he felt stronger, but also more aware that his strength did not come from himself. It was a force that came from the light, a force that came from God. He began to realize that everything he had experienced, the darkness, hell, the encounters with shadows, was not just a punishment, but also a preparation. It was as if each challenge, each obstacle had been training for what was to come. He knew his journey would not end there. In fact, she was just getting started. As he continued, he began to hear again that music that seemed to come from inside him. She was soft, but full of power, like a constant reminder that he was being guided. He began to sing along, almost without realizing it, and felt as if his voice was being amplified, as if every word he sang was spreading across the path ahead, pushing away the shadows and bringing in more light. He knew this song wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who was still stuck in darkness, waiting for a sign that there was hope. It was at that moment that he began to have visions. They were not like the visions he had experienced in hell, full of torment and despair. These visions were different, full of light, of purpose. He saw people he didn't know, faces of men and women, young and old, all looking at him as if expecting something. He realized that these people were the ones he was destined to reach, the ones who needed to hear his story, the ones who needed a living testimony that God still transforms lives. He felt the urgency to act, to leave that place and begin his mission. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't rush it. There were lessons he still needed to learn, truths he needed to absorb before he was ready to share what he had experienced. He felt the light around him intensify, as if it was telling him to trust the process, to keep walking, and allow God to guide each step. He began to think about everything he had learned up to that point. He thought about the importance of faith, the need to leave pride and guilt behind, and the power of redemption. But most of all, he thought about love. A love that was so great, so all-encompassing, that it could reach even the darkest place of hell to rescue a lost soul. He knew that this love was what was sustaining him, what was guiding his steps, what had given him a new chance. As he walked, he began to speak out loud, as if he was rehearsing for the moment when he would tell his story to the world. If God could save me, He can save you. No matter where you are, no matter what you've done, there is a way back. There is a light that is waiting for you. All you have to do is give the first step. He felt the words leave his mouth with an authority he had never felt before. He knew it wasn't just him talking. It was something greater, something divine. I want you to comment here. I choose the light. Write these words as a statement of faith, as a commitment to pursue the purpose God has for your life. Your story matters too, and your decision to follow the light could be the start of something extraordinary. Share your thoughts in the comments, because we are on this journey together. There is still more to explore, more to discover, and I promise the next step will be even more transformative. Don't stop now. He continued following the path, each step more firm, but at the same time more loaded with meaning. There was no longer any doubt about what he needed to do, but that didn't make the journey any less challenging. The light around him still shone, but now it seemed more like a presence dwelling within him than an external force guiding him. It was as if the transformation that had begun the moment he stepped through the portal had deepened even further, taking root in every part of his being. He was no longer the same person who had entered that place, and he knew it. As he walked, he began to feel something different in his surroundings. The path seemed narrower, more focused, almost as if it were being led to a specific point. He looked ahead and saw something that made him stop. It was a mirror, large and imposing, with a golden frame that seemed to shine with its own light. He hesitated for a moment, but knew he needed to get closer. When he stood in front of the mirror, he saw something he didn't expect. He didn't just see his reflection. He saw all that he was, all that he had been. In the reflection, he saw the moments of his life that had been marked by pain, by wrong choices, by paths that had led him to destruction. He saw the child he was, full of fear and anger, trying to survive in a world that seemed cruel and unforgiving. He saw the young man who had chosen violence as a solution to his pain, who had hardened his heart so as not to feel the weight of what he was doing. He saw the man he had become, burdened with guilt, but unable to admit it to himself. But he also saw something else. He saw the light that now shone within him, a light that wasn't there before, a light that had been planted there the moment he chose to let go of the past. He realized that the reflection was not there to condemn him, but to remind him of what he had overcome. The mirror was not a judgment. It was a testimony. He saw that although the past was still part of his story, it no longer defined who he was. As he looked at his reflection, he felt a presence beside him. He couldn't see, but he knew he was no longer alone. It was as if someone was there, watching, waiting for him. He heard that voice again, but this time it was softer, almost a whisper. "I was always with you, even when you didn't see me, even when you rejected me. I never abandoned you." Those words hit him like a blow, but not with pain, with love. He began to cry, tears streaming down his face as he finally understood what it meant to be loved unconditionally. He reached for the mirror, as if trying to reach something inside it. The moment his hand touched the surface, the mirror dissolved into a wave of light that completely enveloped him. He felt as if he was being purified, as if all the weight he still carried, even after everything he had experienced, was being ripped away from within him. He fell to his knees, unable to contain his emotion. He knew that moment was a turning point, a milestone in his journey. When the light finally dimmed, the mirror was gone, but he felt that something new had been deposited within it. He felt a peace that could not be described, a certainty that he was not just heading towards a destination. He was already living the purpose that had been placed before him. He stood up and looked towards the horizon, where the light continued to shine, calling him to continue. He started walking again, but now there was a new determination in his steps. He knew there were still challenges ahead, but he also knew he wouldn't face them alone. He felt the presence of God stronger than ever, like a force that sustained him, like a friend who walked beside him. He began to pray out loud, not because he needed answers, but because he felt a gratitude so deep that he couldn't contain it. "Thank you, Lord, for not giving up on me. Thank you for giving me a second chance, for showing me that even when everything seems lost, there is still hope. Thank you for teaching me that my past does not define my future, and that your grace is greater than any mistake I have made." He knew those words weren't just for him. They were for everyone who needed to hear it, for everyone who was still stuck in what he had left behind. I want you to comment here, "I am transformed by the light." Write these words as an act of faith, as a reminder that your story can be transformed too, no matter where you are now. Share what this message means to you, because your participation is important, not just for me, but for everyone reading and looking for inspiration. Stay with me, because there's more to come. This journey is not over yet, and I promise that what comes next will be even deeper and more transformative. Let's continue together. If you've made it this far, know that this wasn't by chance. Every moment of this video was created to reach your heart and bring a message of hope, transformation, and purpose. No matter where you are or what you're facing, God is there, touching lives and changing stories. And if you're here now, He wants to do that for you too. We want to know how this video impacted your spiritual journey and how it spoke to your heart. Comment below. I felt God's voice in this video, and share your experience. Your message can not only confirm what God is doing in your life, but also inspire others who need that same word of hope. Your participation is essential for this message to reach even more lives. Click the like button, because each like makes this message reach other people who also need to hear about the love and transforming power of God. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that edifies, challenges, and transforms. Here, we are building a community of faith, where each video is an opportunity to grow spiritually and strengthen your walk with God. And don't stop here. The next video is already waiting for you on the final screen, with another message that will certainly touch your heart deeply. God has a greater plan for your life, and every step you take toward His light is a step of victory. May He powerfully bless your life, renew your strength, and bring peace to your heart. Thank you for being with us on this journey of faith. Let's continue together.